So just recap, Shakar told us about how the pandemic brought us the idea of resilient health systems, health population, investment on human resources, and the engagement of non-state actors. And he also brought some recommendations regarding, for example, evidence-based locally solution, health innovation, for example, science, diagnostics, treatment, control, and telemedicine. And he brought a very good positive message that the 2030 agenda on NCDs is achievable. Francesco told us about the burden of unhealthy foods, how foods and nutrients are handled, the problem with ultra-processed food, obesity, undernutrition, micronutrient deficiency, and leading to several other health conditions and diseases. But he also brought us some very good ideas and policy options, for example, of the sustainable health diets, the WHO policy options such as the reformulation of products, price policies, public food procurement, the front pack labeling, and fortifying foods and market regulation. And our third panelist, Thomas, brought very good aspects on how health could positive impact the sustainable development, the importance of partnership to control NCDs, and the need of clear rules of engagement. And he also enlightened us with some examples in Brazil, in the state of Bahia, Amazonas, and Minas Gerais. And he also brought very good ideas by the end of this methodological framework aiming to strengthen the universal health system in Brazil, the SUS, and how it could improve the government to access gap and attract investment, especially on primary healthcare resolution capacity. So now we are going to have a debate where the chat is open for anyone who would like to pose a question. And I can see that we have already one question from Yara, I think. The first question is from Yara, just 1 second. Here it is, to Thomas. PPP is always very welcome, but in the health sector, there is a fine line sometimes that can be interpreted as a possible conflict of interest. It is clear that we may be missing out and many opportunities here, which could have been avoided perhaps with well-defined partnership models, etc. So my question is, based on your experience, how could we deal with this issue?
Yeah, should I answer now, Diogo?
Yes, and then I'm going to keep
all right.
Posting the questions, please.
All right, thanks, you. Thank you for the question, Yara. I think that you put a very very important question, because we are differently from other infrastructure sectors and differently from other PPPs and concessions that we have, for instance, in roads, in airports. Here we're speaking about human lives, so we have to be very careful when communicating to the society, communicating with governments, communicating with investors. So I think that the key for doing that is to, first of all, is to have very good contracts and very good, as we call, performance indicators, clinical indicators, non-clinical indicators in these agreements. We have to discuss with society. So when we are doing PPPs in Brazil, we have to have public consultations. We have to do market soundings. We have to speak with the social control, as we call here in the SUS. We have to speak with society to really understand what would be the best, the most critical needs of society, and try to negotiate as much as possible. Because the demand for health in Brazil, we know is tremendous, but we have to negotiate what is priority. So I think that the key here would be really to use the embedding environment to try as much as possible to be transparent and speak with society and bring society into the making and the crafting of a PPP agreement in healthcare over the long run.
Thank you, Thomas. And in the same line, I would like to address the same question to Shakar regarding your experience and how we can deal with this issue.
Yeah, thank you, Diego. I think this is a very important question. We have over the last few years entered into more than 100 such collaborations across low and middle income countries in different facets of non-communicable disease area. And what we have learned, I think there are a few fundamental principles which I outlined in my initial talk. First of all, between partners, we need to really clearly align on what is the problem that we are trying to solve, the issue to be solved, and what is the evidence from a solution perspective that we are trying to come up with. So clear alignment on the problem to be solved and the evidence-based approach is something which works very clearly. We need to have an approach which is also anchored around implementation science. So I think these are some of the fundamental principles we have followed. And the third part, which I think very clearly Thomas outlined, was the governance, which is an important facet as well. Are we able to have a clear, transparent governance between the public sector and the private sector on what is the outcome, what are the milestones, and how do we really assess the performance indicators or the success? I think that is equally important for us to really put that in place before we start, and not as an ad hoc or subsequently. I think this is an also equally important consideration. So these are a couple of considerations I would really suggest to add to the success of a PPP.
Thank you, Shakar. So my next question goes to Francisco Branca. In the first panel, Patricia Vasconcelos from the Ministry of Health presented that young people present poor food consumption than other older individuals in Brazil. What policies would you recommend to change this scenario?
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting question. And clearly the first point is, why is that the case? So this is really a demonstration of the power of food transformation. So the food system have been evolving, and definitely processed food are occupying a greater space in our diets. And marketing has a big responsibility for that change. So certain processed food are really described as innovative, as modern, as more appealing from the point of view of the taste, also more easily accessible, often cheaper. And marketing is not just the advertisement. You have the 5 P's, product, price, promotion, place, and people. So everything is designed to make those products appealing for the younger people. So that's why the policies to control marketing food to children are so important. But that's only one element. We also this is not only about prohibition. This is about suggesting a food culture which is associated to health, but is also associated to the protection of the planet. So we need to have movements which are appealing to young people for foods which is healthy and comes from sustainable food system, and using the same in a sense using the same tools. I mean, we cannot have a healthy diet which is more expensive than a non-healthy diet. I mean, that's a paradox. So there must be some investment, public and private investment to make that happen. And then it's about the offer of food. I mean, you go in every petrol station, what do you find? You go in every corner, in every station, what do you find? I mean, the availability of the healthier products needs to improve. So we need to use what we call the nudges to make people choose the right food. I mean, if you go in a machine that distributes food product, what do you find? You find always products high in fat, sugar, and salt. But you actually have the healthier alternatives, which are also convenient. So we need to use that. And finally, I think the aspect of reformulation is important, because it's true that I think it's going to be very difficult to reverse completely the use of processed food. So let's try to at least have processed food which is a better formulation. There's no need have that much sugar in processed food. There's no need to have that much salt. They're still going to be palatable foods. And you know, this has to start very early in life. Can you find easily a yogurt which has no sugar for children? You can't. So we need to start with that exposure to foods much earlier in life. So foods, particularly the ones designed for children, what we call the complementary food, should not have the amount of sugar that it's there at the moment. So that will, you know, also help a shift in the habits of the population. And then, of course, for the older people, have the strength of the culture. I mean, the traditional food culture is so important. It's so meaningful. And I think it would be still important to have that value of identity of the food culture in a country like Brazil. Also, the way, I mean, Brazil has dietary guidelines, for example, talks about the way you eat food. So not only about the food itself, but it's also having you know, meals as a social habit, not having, you know, foods while you're outside and walk, but, you know, really have dedicated time. So these cultural aspects, which are probably more, let's say, appealing for the older generation, might come back for the younger generation. I mean, marketing people should work for health, not against that.
Thank you, Francesco. Yeah, Brazil is a very good laboratory for that, and we are developing some very good examples here. And you told that it's very important not only to raise awareness, but also to offer healthy options to the population. And we also have the guidelines on the Brazilian diet. So this is very good, because then you can act locally and you can also promote the local producers. So just I have just one question to Thomas, and I'm going to put another one here because it's really very important, this question. Globally, we have other health matters attracting more private funding to NCDs. In Brazil, even less. So what are your recommendations to make NCDs more attractive to private funders or donors? And also this one here, that what are the main barriers that you faced when you proposed these standards to the Brazilian government, to the Brazilian market? So please, Thomas.
I'm gonna start by the second one, which I think is simpler. I think that you know, we're still proposing for municipalities, and although there was lots of progress over the, I would say, 10 to 15 years where we had the very first PPP implemented in the country, and you have, for instance, in some governments, you have already the OS, the social organization. So the culture of having private sector embedded in the public, in the schools, in the universal system is already there. I would say that there's still lots of resistance over the idea of having private sector in the making and in the delivery of healthcare solutions. So I think that if I got correctly, the first question was what would be the main bottleneck or the main issues to really have more of those experiences in Brazil. I would say that the first is still, you know, I would say sort of an ideological barrier to have private sector involved, with the aim of having you know, better services and measurable better services, evidence-based, as Shekhar was mentioning before. And the second question, I think, is related to how to make it NCDs more appealing to financing. I would say that you have to, I mean, the more visible, the more awareness and the more advocacy we do, and the more we try to speak the language of private sector, the better. With guarantees, with regulatory regimes, with rule of law. So there are many angles by which we could try to enable more funding for NSTs, but it's like doing an investment, right? You have to have a certain angles in the house to make it more appealing to private sector. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Shakar, I saw you raise your hand in the previous question, so perhaps you would like to complement.
Yes, I mean, I
discussion.
wanted to supplement an excellent response from Francisco on the previous question around the nudges, how we can make it attractive from a food perspective, the food policies. I just wanted to add that fundamentally we need to start looking at principles of behavioral economics in decision making, because even though we may know things, but we do not necessarily implement, and that is human behavior. And this is exactly what we see across the non-communicable diseases. It is seen in food, it is seen in obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular, across the range of conditions. If we can improve the behavior by applying the principles, by improving the choices that the people make, by providing them incentives and by providing them punishments, it is a choice architecture that we need to really modulate. And that is where I think we have the nudge theory, which will be phenomenal in application if we were to apply for improving the patient outcomes. But I mean, this is just to supplement what Francisco already mentioned in his response.
Very good words, because now I have one final questions to Francesco, and has to do with your comments here. Francesco, how can we improve this kind of policies in a world in that food industry is so strong and food policies in Brazil are very weakened?
Well, it's a very important question. I mean, particularly in a conversation today where we're talking about the value of public-private partnership, and clearly, of course, we're talking about different kinds of private sector, and there is perhaps a different risk of their engagement according to the nature of the service they provide. And I think Brazil has actually an interesting experience of using a tool which WHO has developed to assess conflict of interest. And the approach is really risk assessment. So it's not black and white. It's sort of the engagement with food producers and distributors depends on the nature of the actor, but also depends on the objective of the collaboration. And it is possible to assess this risk and then have adequate measures to protect against conflict of interest. Clearly, when it comes to regulatory policies, that engagement becomes more difficult. But it's still possible to hear the position of the companies, as it has happened, for example, in many countries that we're looking at front of the pack labeling. You hear from them, but they don't necessarily, sit at the table of the decision making. That would be, of course, seen and probably would practically be a conflict of interest. So risk assessment approach is an important one in terms of the engagement. Now, we are aware that certain policies are actively objective. I mean, the ones that I mentioned in my presentation are often actively objected by the companies, because that would, change. That would lead to a change in the consumption of certain products, and therefore a change in their sales. But companies would have to adjust their companies' corporate policies to align to health objectives. So I think we need to accept that there is a problem there. We need to accept that we need to be very transparent about the engagement and avoid conflict of interest. But also we need a strong civil society, because the strong civil society might demand for policies and also monitor the implementation. We have very good example. I mean, the very difficult discussion around taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages in Mexico, for example, was initiated by a strong civil society campaign. And unless we have a strong civil society, it's difficult also to have a balanced engagement where conflict of interest is actively monitored, not just by the government officials, but by the society. So transparency, engagement of civil society, I think these are important elements. But we need to acknowledge it's a difficult engagement, if not difficult fight.
Thank you, Francesco. So as we are proceeding to the final moment of this international panel, I would like to give the floor to you to some close words, close remarks. So let's follow the same order of the presentation. First, Shakar, I would like to give the floor to you. Please, is yours.
Thank you, Diego. I think this has been an absolutely interesting and very, very provocative, important discussion for us to have. How do we build back better? I just want to reiterate what we discussed. I think it is very much within our reach. We have 8 years to reach 2030 target of NCD goals, SDG. And there is a lot that needs to be done. If we will need to step up and accelerate the efforts which are going on. And for that, everybody has to come together. I think all the stakeholders need to come together with a clear agenda. I think we have seen the NCD investment case with the clear ROI. 19:1 is the net ROI that we are talking about. For every dollar invested, we probably will have 19-fold impact. And if that is the case that we are talking about, I think it is only clear, only imperative that all stakeholders come together with clear agenda and with the clear solutions that have local relevance. I just want to reiterate that and really appreciate the opportunity to participate in this esteemed panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakar, for your words, and also to your presence to this very important debate. And now I would like to give the floor to Francesco Branca.
Thank you, Johan. Also, I'd like to share the views of Shekar. This has been a lively, interesting debate. I personally have learned a lot from the colleagues that come from the investment side. But really, my final message is that food system transformation is needed, cannot be delayed. Business as usual is not an option. And I'd like to use the same slogan. We can build back better after the pandemic. Now the pandemic is followed by a war, so the system has to be transformed. I mean, that the war has actually generated a food security crisis. So how can we, think of feeding the whole world population is going to get 10 to 10 billion in 2050 with this dysfunctional food system? Simply not possible. So we need to have a change in food system. We need to have a recovery of a food system which is so heavily affected. It needs to be green and healthy. And we definitely need to have these objectives about health for the people and health for the planet, which are not incompatible with prosperity. They are compatible with prosperity. In fact, they are. I mean, as Thomas was saying, the healthier and the better lives, even the greater income. So let's try to, have this really as the agenda for the next century.
Thank you, Francesca, for your words and also for this final call of for action for our for the public here and for our partners in Brazil. And please, Thomas, the floor is yours.
No, thank you very much. It was I appreciate very much for the learnings that I had with Shekar and Francesca this morning. Was really, really, very, very good for my own knowledge here I learned a lot. Thank you, Diogo and Mark for the invitation. And my final message here is to deal with the role of PPP, with the roles of private sector and with the roles of PPPs. I think that we'll have to demystify a little bit the tools there, not only in Brazil but in other places. We have to really understand better the tool and see how we can best adapt them to primary healthcare, to emergency healthcare, to many angles in healthcare, the needed healthcare in the world. So my final message is that the real importance of private sector to really achieve the SDG 3 by 2030, as Shekar was mentioning. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Thomas. Thank you to you all. I believe that your words, your recommendations, our arguments will be very useful for the following panels that are coming, so people can reflect and react to all those ideas. Thank you again for your presence here, for your time, and I would like to give back the floor to Mark Baroni. Thank you.